Hello and welcome to Grid Forward Forum. I'm Julia Selker, Director of Policy and Strategy at Grid Strategies, a transmission and power markets policy consulting firm, and I am your guest host for this episode. Most of my work is on policy to advance grid-enhancing technologies, which are software and hardware that open up more usable capacity on the existing transmission grid. And we're talking about one specific GET today, Dynamic Line Ratings, or DLR. We have the CEO of dynamic line rating company LineVision, Vishal Kapadia from LineVision, here to tell us about this technology. So Vishal, you're new to this industry. What drew you to become the CEO of a dynamic line rating company, and how does your background inform your leadership in this field?
Well, first off, Julia, thanks for having me today. Very glad to be here. I would say that, if you asked me what I'd be doing today when back in 2008, when I joined an investment bank at the onset of the financial crisis, I can safely say that it most certainly would not have been transmission grid intelligence. Look, I've been around the energy industry for just about the last 15 years. Variety of different types of businesses and roles within them. I got started in a small private equity-backed business that pioneered the third-party land ownership model for utility-scale solar projects and was able to help sell that business off to Hannon Armstrong. I then led project finance for Enel for about a couple of years and went back to banking for a stint with Morgan Stanley to lead renewables financing there. But after a few years, I got pulled back into the private equity-backed world to join a business called Lincoln Clean Energy. And I was able to help lead the transformation of what was, when I joined, just a 20-person business with 800 megawatts of West Texas wind into what became a 300-person, 5-gigawatt full-spectrum global renewables platform in just about 3.5 years' time after we were able to get that business sold off to Ørsted pretty quickly after I joined. And so that was a lot of fun. It all went really fast, and we had grown as much through M&A as we did through our own development pipeline, which is always an interesting journey to be a part of. But after a few years there, I took a bit of a pivot and went to the energy consumer side of the equation. And I spent the past few years building and executing on a new energy strategy for Walmart. That was a really broad mandate to drive energy security and affordability for our operations and our communities, and also building new businesses around the energy transition. The most notable of which is the Walmart-owned retail charging network that's being rolled out now across multiple markets around the country. But over a few years was able to really be successful in establishing lots of new capabilities there and transform how the company thought about energy, and see it as a critical enabler for a lot of their growth agenda, particularly around the automation transformation, that was happening within the business. But what I saw above all in that role was really a whole host of challenges. I was responsible for the entirety of our utility operations. It was, access and power spend with over 3,000 electric, water, and gas utilities around the U.S. It was getting more and more difficult to access power to support the growth of our business. The costs of that power were going up at an increasingly escalating rate, and reliability was under pressure almost across the board. And so when I was approached to take on the CEO opportunity here at LineVision and spent a good bit of time learning about the business, it was quite clear to me that the company had developed an innovative solution to address these challenges in the hardest place to address them, in the transmission space. And so I'm only a few months into my new role here, but I'm super excited to be able to bring a lot of my experience in helping accelerate and transform businesses, here to my role at LineVision. And I'm excited to be able to take on the challenge of scaling our ability to really focus on helping electric utilities deliver affordable, reliable power with our transmission grid intelligence solutions, one of which is delivering accurate network-wide dynamic line ratings.
Awesome. And I think it's a great endorsement of the industry when people, the grid enhancing technologies industry, when people come in from, with a background as diverse as yours and say, what I want to solve is this grid intelligence problem and monitoring the grid. When I talk to, even advocates in the, environmental space, when they understand that we just don't know what the grid is capable of and we don't have any, sensors out there telling us what's going on in the field, people are shocked. I think in this iPhone world, we expect to know better. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what dynamic line ratings are specifically and what folds into that even beyond the DLR category?
Yeah, well, look, first off, it is a really challenging time for electric utilities. As I touched on a little bit, power demand's increasing, rates are going up faster than inflation. There's an increasing number of, extreme weather events and wildfires. And And the mix of the sources of generation that's being added to the system is shifting towards more intermittent renewable sources. And so it's just increasingly more difficult for utilities to be able to meet their objective of delivering affordable, reliable power at a time when we need as much of it as we can get. And so, put simply, I think people should be focused on thinking about dynamic line ratings because they can help. At the end of the day, they're a diagnostic tool that is fuel and resource agnostic, and they help control room operators determine the amount of power that transmission lines are actually safely capable of carrying. Sometimes there can be circumstances where there's excess capacity on the line. Sometimes there's not enough. But by having access to that data, that intelligence, and actually operationalizing it and using it to make decisions around it, you're able to unlock what I like to call an arc of value. And by arc, it's an acronym. I'm fond of acronyms, and so I've come up with one here to simplify the value proposition. But the arc is really in the case of the A, it's asset utilization, right? The dynamic line ratings, they help with optimizing the infrastructure that we've got for those areas where there is excess capacity. It can be utilized and help reduce congestion, which is another word for wasted energy on our transmission lines. You'll probably have these statistics more at hand than I would, Julia, but from my math, I think it's an average of over $15 billion that we've seen across the US across 2022 and 2023. And so these are pretty significant numbers. The R is for reliability and resilience. Dynamic line ratings and network visibility associated with them, they empower control room operators with greater operational flexibility as they're increasingly having to manage through rapidly shifting load and generation mix issues and deal with more extreme weather events and even temperatures in different parts of the country. And then thirdly, it's around capital spend. In addition to optimizing what we've got, having network-wide visibility delivers insights into where we need to build more infrastructure, where we might be able to wait on some projects, and help with how to prioritize that spend. Julia, that helps everyone. Utilities, regulators, customers, they get to feel more confident about the investments that are being made to support the critical backbone of our economy. With over $200 billion of transmission spend that's planned across just the next 5 years, these are some pretty big dollars at stake, and having more insight and intelligence and to be able to inform that certainly of value. So I think, cutting through a lot of that technical stuff at a high level, dynamic line ratings and network visibility help you optimize what's already out there and then give you more information so you can feel a lot more confident about the major purchases that are being made across our power sector.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure most of the Grid Forward audience knows what dynamic line ratings are already, but at the most basic level, we're talking about measuring the impact of ambient conditions on the carrying capacity of the grid, because running power through a line heats it up, and wind and rain and even just cold weather can significantly increase the capacity of those lines. So can you give us some examples of where LineVision has deployed these tools and the kind of results you're seeing?
Yeah, a couple of examples with one of our customers, National Grid in the UK. They're in a situation with that network. They've got lots of offshore wind, up in the north part of the country that needs to flow from the far north down to the south. And that gets constrained, as it's moving through the different boundaries across their system. And so National Grid has deployed dynamic line ratings to be able to help reduce some of that congestion. And with the deployments that we've done, we've seen some pretty amazing results. I mean, the capacity that has been unlocked to reduce that congestion has helped to the tune of somewhere on the order of $18 million of savings that's being realized on a per annum basis. And so I'm really excited about having been able to work with National Grid on get that deployed and see some of those results out there in the UK. Another one of our customers here in the US is AES. From the intelligence that our deployments unlocked across some parts of their system in Indiana and Ohio, what they were able to see that they needed to reconductor a span rather than tens of miles of transmission lines. And they were able to realize pretty significant capacity benefits at less than a tenth of what it would have cost to reconductor the line. And by it having been applicable to one single span, they were also able to avoid weeks of outages and months of construction time that would have come from a much larger project. So, Julia, these are real tangible benefits that can accrue, both to utilities and ultimately their customers as well. But there are times when, they can also cause downstream impacts on other parts of the system, meaning you can solve a problem of congestion in one place and it might pop up somewhere else. And so what really unlocks that sort of full arc of benefits is network-wide visibility. And so it's not a lot of different than other areas, where really moving from pilot to expanded deployment to scale is really the key to unlock the full value of the benefits of the technology.
That's a great point. I think many people in the United States will be familiar with some of the initial deployments of DLR at National Grid in New York, at PPL in Pennsylvania, Great River Energy in Minnesota. Some big deployments happening in the West now too. So we see these popping up and it's really exciting. But what you just mentioned about that full grid visibility is really the most bang for your buck on many levels. So I'm curious, what do you think it takes for utilities to get to that full scale deployment? Are there key drivers? Are there things that need to be in place for that to happen?
Well, look, load growth is certainly one driver, and the environment that we're in now is pushing for more interest, more review of these types of technologies and the benefits thereof. While the capacity that dynamic line ratings unlocked isn't necessarily the be all end all in terms of being able to do things like get a full large scale data center interconnected, the intelligence does provide utilities with the flexibility to optimize what exists, perhaps as a bridge to some of the longer term solutions that are going to be required in order to facilitate that capacity coming online on a more permanent basis. Also, reliability and resilience are drivers as well. Even if there may not be these very, very large headline gains of 30 or 40%, across a system or across some lines, even just knowing that there might be small amounts of incremental capacity in the places and the times when they're needed most, that can be incredibly valuable, for utilities as they're trying to navigate some adverse operating conditions. And certainly, I think almost across the board, obviously more so in the West than in some of the Eastern regions just yet, but there's certainly growing need and recognition for grid intelligence and monitoring to be able to help mitigate some of the growing risks from increasingly severe wildfires, which, as I said, are not just happening in the West, but are spreading in other parts of the country as well. And so, to me, it's all of the above, but the main driver in my mind that is for us as Line Vision and others in the space, a great place to be is that, we're in a place where there's a tangible, pressing business need for solutions to meet the challenges that our customers are facing, as opposed to sort of the alternative, where things are kind of being pushed from a policy perspective or otherwise without there perhaps being that market need for it. And so I think being in a place where we've got that intersection that's come together is a really good place to be for us.
Yeah, I think in some ways, dynamic line ratings are new to the utility in the speed at which they pay themselves back, especially the teams that are looking at them, like transmission planning and operations. You're looking at an investment that could pay for itself 10 to 20 times over in a year or two. This is a new paradigm, right? But also, is the utility structured in a way that value lives in one team, or the integration challenges is kind of like spread out across different utility teams? And I'm rambling through this question, but my point is, what are some of the structural barriers or opportunities to getting DLR fully implemented?
Yeah, well, look, I think I'd maybe zoom it out a level, right? And I think that there's two things with any new technology. One is that it needs to prove value, and two, it needs to be reliable. On the first one, if there's a clear business case with tangible, measurable value, that certainly helps calibrate and center the impetus and the desire to move forward with it in the right place. And it's going to be critical to be able to develop a path to scale. And so sort of start with that. The second bit is reliability. Things just need to work. I think it's important for people to realize that the utility industry, it is a 4 nines availability business. And by that, I mean, power needs to be on 99.99% of the time. And increasingly, they're now being asked to support facilities, data centers in particular, that have 6 or 7 nines availability requirements, which means that, as a company, you need to be a 6 or 7 nines availability company. Because from the utilities perspective, I think they'd much rather have 80% of the technology that works 100% of the time, versus the other way around. I think if you can clear those two hurdles, then you get into just making sure that you've got the right people engaged. At the end of the day, these new technologies, they all represent change that's coming onto the system, and that needs to be managed. And so as you're working through the process, having engagement from the folks who are we're going to live with that change and have them be brought along the journey to feel that they own the change. That's ultimately mission critical for the change to be able to stick. But to your point around, sort of the dynamic between, planning and operations, I put that on us, Julia. Like certainly they've got, different organizational models and, certain folks are focused on different things, but, it's incumbent on us to do the work. As I mentioned, when I think about that arc of value, I mean, there's elements of that span both planning and operations. And if some of those connections aren't being made in those organizations, then we've got to go off and help our customers figure out how to make them. To me, as the value presents itself, as there are more deployments and you start to see the scale, there's more tangible results, more case studies out there for how that technology is scaling, more of those sort of, national grid use cases as well as the AES use cases. It's about how you take that information and present it in a way that speaks to the different audiences in the organization to be able to help them bridge those gaps. And so, certainly every organization has its own dynamics and, different ways of working. We've got to know our customers and, understand those and put our customers and the folks within our customers in a position to be able to navigate their organization and arm them with the information they need to do that can allow us to facilitate a path to scale.
Costly distribution upgrades, frequent extreme weather events, demand surging from an onslaught of distributed energy resources adoption. Do these challenges sound familiar? If so, you need Virtual Peaker's cloud-based distributed energy platform. We're empowering modern utilities with next-generation virtual power plant solutions to maximize the value of DERs. The Virtual Peaker platform unifies all aspects of DER management, from DERMS to customer engagement and demand forecasting. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com.
We've talked a lot about the utility world and use cases, but there's, other tailwinds to this industry that are the incredible amount of state and federal policy that are supporting grid modernization. So we have 3 FERC rules that are supporting grid enhancing technologies, including one really focused on managing transmission line ratings, Order 881, and then a suite of about 14 state laws that are supporting wider deployment of grid enhancing technologies and faster to deal with the really, urgent crises around affordability and load growth. So how do you see that policy library affecting the way that the industry is going?
Yeah. Well, look, I think, Julie, as a general matter, like it's not much of a debate that at every level, country, region, state, we're short capacity versus where demand is heading. Not being able to meet that is going to hinder economic growth locally in some pockets of the country. It is and will continue to create reliability issues that will have meaningful economic consequences to local businesses and communities. And we've clearly got an affordability issue in a lot of pockets of the country when it comes to electricity rates as well. So, look, utilities are working really, really hard to address these issues, and we all need to help them. And so, I think, but before I get to the policy bit, I'll just go back to us as an industry. I think there's work to be done to better talk about the full scale of the value proposition of the intelligence we deliver. We feel quite good about where we've evolved to in that regard, and from everything that I've seen, the value to our customers and to their customers. Like it's clearly there. We just have to show them and articulate in a way that is digestible and connects to folks. And so, I sort of put that piece of it on us a little bit. But on the policy front, I mean, look, you mentioned a number of different elements that are supportive. A number of states across the political spectrum, passing bills calling for a review and study of GETS. The White House AI Action Plan acknowledged the need to optimize our existing grid resources as much as possible. And to enhance the efficiency and the performance of our transmission grid. And the speed to power RFI that, was proposed by the DOE a couple of weeks ago, certainly clear interest there in expanding transmission grid capacity to be able to meet demand growth in a reliable and affordable way. And so these are all super positive developments. I'm certainly as someone who's, looking to anything and everything that we can do to help our utility customers move towards where we need to move to in terms of being able to drive to network-wide visibility and realize that full scope of benefits. These are incredibly positive developments, and As I said, it goes back to us as an industry to just, do what we need to do to prove value and have that be the way to really have everyone lockstep aligned on how we can accelerate growth and see these technologies achieve network-wide scale.
Yeah, again, that makes so much sense to me, and really excited to have leaders like you joining this industry. I think we've seen a huge change in the attitudes towards GETS in the last few years, and it is a global and competitive industry at this point. And you're right, it's a mature world out there, and dynamic line ratings can sell themselves on their value to the utilities and to utility customers. So it's awesome to see where we are today. Any final words for the Grid Forward Chats audience on this topic?
No, well, look, first, Julia, I appreciate you having me and taking the time to chat here. I'd echo a lot of what you just said, is that, we are in a place where there's plenty of use cases out there, plenty of case studies, the technology is proven, it's mature. And I think the objective now is just putting ourselves in a position where we can scale these technologies network wide, because that's really how you unlock the full scope of benefits that they can bring to the table. And so I'm thrilled to be here, excited to take on the task and help us do more and go faster. And more importantly, help our customers do what it is that they need to do, just get more affordable, reliable power out there for our customers and our communities.
Awesome. Well, and I'm not sure that this podcast will come out before the Grid Forward 2025 meeting, but encourage folks who are there to meet with the GETS vendors who will be present, Line Vision among them, and learn more about these technologies. Thank you, Vishal, for this conversation. It has been a pleasure to guest host Grid Forward Chats. Thank you all for listening to the podcast. Thanks to the season's sponsor, Virtual Peaker. You can find all of Grid Forward Forum's episodes on your favorite podcast apps or on the Grid Forward website, gridforward.org.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Forward Forum, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.